Hi, it's me, Dr. Bobby. Today's topic is anxiety prevention. And I thought of this because I talk a lot about anxiety management. So we're learning how to manage anxiety once it crops up. But I realized that there's a lot that I do in my daily life and with my clients to set them up to just experience less anxiety in the first place. So I'm going to talk about what habits, practices, and skills you can develop to stop anxiety from building up in the first place. Now, spoiler alert, you're going to hear me a lot in this lesson talk about inflammation, and I'll talk about it enough that it almost warrants being in the title, but I thought the title of inflammation and anxiety, people would be like, what the fuck is that? So I'm just calling it anxiety prevention, but I'll explain in a minute why inflammation underlies a lot of the ways that I work with people and that I do things for myself to minimize bodily inflammation, because it minimizes anxiety as well as a host of other health things. So I come from a long line of anxious and depressed people. It runs in my veins. So if you spend any time around me, you know that I take medication for depression and anxiety, that I've had a lot of therapy on and off, and I manage it really well now. I'm getting up there in years, and it wasn't always the case for me. I love sharing what's worked for me and what I've seen work with the clients that I've worked with in the online space and in my therapy practice. So I'm going to talk about things today that absolutely have scientific backing behind them, but also I'm going to talk about them anecdotally because they've worked for me and they've worked for my clients. So I want to discuss what chronic inflammation is and how prolonged exposure to chronic inflammation can have different effects on your body and brain. Inflammation is actually a natural and protective response by our body's immune system to any kind of injury or infection or stressor. So the purpose of inflammation is actually to defend our bodies against harmful stimulus and to initiate the healing process. And it also removes damaged cells and any kind of pathogens in the body. So it's crucial to our immune response, and we want to have inflammation because it helps us fight off germs and injuries, helps us heal. Our immune system is always trying to regulate itself and strike a balance between responding effectively to actual threats and avoiding excessive or prolonged inflammation because it leads to health issues. So I want to talk for a second about acute versus chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation is a short-term immediate response to a specific threat, like a cut or an infection. So we want our acute inflammation response to be in good working order. Chronic inflammation, on the other hand, is a prolonged and often low-grade response, and there are a lot of lifestyle factors that can produce chronic inflammation. You can see that chronic inflammation is linked to virtually every chronic health issue, including anxiety. In our contemporary world, we have stressors and exposures that our ancestors didn't have. This includes things like processed food, air pollution, being more isolated instead of living communally. And the reason that these things trigger that low-grade chronic inflammation response is because our body recognizes them as foreign and not natural. My objective in this lesson is to teach you ways that make it harder for anxiety to thrive in your environment. And as an artist and a creative, it will involve building habits that help you manage your energy so that you stay more open to inspiration. It helps you avoid burnout. It helps your overall emotional health, but it'll help your creative journey too. What I'm going to talk about today in terms of strategies is how to incorporate more anti-inflammatory eating habits without stressing out and turning your life upside down. How to incorporate more movement into your life, again, without having to do a complete overhaul on your life. And sleep is a big one. It's foundational. And I'll show you what these areas look like in real life for me to give you ideas for your own life. And they're not prescriptions. I want you to figure out what works for you, which can look totally different from what works for me, but the main areas are the same. If I'm not exercising and just eating sugar, my reality shifts and everything seems shittier and little things seem overwhelming. And if I shift my food and exercise back to a healthy range, all of a sudden my reality shifts back and it's, oh, that wasn't really shitty after all. I just thought it was. So it's really powerful. There is a significant impact of chronic inflammation on your mental health. And if you can adopt habits and strategies to minimize inflammation, you'll absolutely notice a difference in your mental and emotional health. So I know that saying eat right and exercise is not any kind of groundbreaking news to any of you, but what I want to focus on today is some really easy hacks to actually make it easier to eat better and exercise. If it were that easy, we'd all be doing it, right? And God knows I struggle with it on a regular basis. So I'm going to show you what helps me and what's helped my clients. And again, I need to repeat because it's that like PhD training in my head that I have to repeat. This is scientifically backed. So when we eat food that was created in a factory that didn't grow from the ground, the body recognizes it as some kind of foreign thing and it creates inflammation to try to protect us against it. You can imagine like Fritos are delicious, but even though they come from corn, the way that it's processed and fried in oil that doesn't exist in nature makes it a food that will increase your inflammation. Same thing with most processed foods. The body just doesn't recognize it as food. It'll do the best it can to withdraw whatever nutrients are in it, but it's also fighting an inflammation reaction. You can imagine that we're all going around chronically inflamed unless you happen to eat a completely whole foods diet. I would love to do that. I aspire to do that, but I don't do that. I just ate some Hershey Kisses this morning, like before breakfast. Okay, what is so bad about processed foods? I guess I want to differentiate first between processed foods and ultra-processed foods. A processed food would be like a can of beans or a bag of frozen peas. These are things that are technically processed because they were cooked or frozen and put into a bag or a jar or a can. So they didn't just come right from the tree or the ground to your plate. But if you look at the ingredients, they'll be like, salt and water in it or something like that. I'm not talking about those kinds of processed foods when I'm talking about the kinds of foods that cause inflammation. I'm talking about the ultra-processed foods that are made of ingredients that really are more chemicals than foods. And there are some points I want to go over about what these ultra-processed foods don't have that they should have and what they do have that they shouldn't have for good health and less anxiety. The one thing that's out of whack with ultra-processed foods is that they have too many omega-6 fatty acids and not enough omega-3 fatty acids. It turns out that in nature, the way that those two fatty acids occur is in the ratio that is optimum for our health and probably the planet's health, which is about a 2-to-1 of 6-to-3. If you eat some walnuts or salmon, you're getting that ratio of omega-6s and omega-3s. And those are really healthy fats and they are anti-inflammatory. So ultra-processed foods have too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, which is very inflammatory on our body, it turns out. And it's not even just by a little bit. It's like instead of a 2-to-1 ratio, it'll be like 20-to-1 or 100-to-1. It's really out of whack. And so when our body is trying to digest and incorporate that, it just doesn't really know what to do with it because it's not something that exists in nature. And so it treats it as a foreign invader and it creates that inflammation, that immune response. The other thing they're missing is the phytonutrients, the vitamins and minerals and micronutrients that occur if you eat, say, an apple versus an apple chip that's been fried. And then they're also missing fiber. When foods are processed, whatever fiber was present in the fruit or vegetable is stripped away in the course of processing the food. And that means that It's not supporting a healthy gut biome, and it also means you don't get full as quickly, and so you're going to eat more just to feel full. One thing that ultra-processed foods contains that is never good for us is trans fat. So many super processed foods have a lot of trans fat in them, which is, again, inflammatory. There are also compounds in factory-created foods called glycation end products. Glycation end products are usually produced when foods are cooked at high temperatures, and they're associated with inflammation. Ultra-processed food also spikes our blood sugar, which affects our metabolism and our insulin resistance, and those things are related to inflammation. In terms of the gut biome, ultra-processed foods don't nourish the gut, and they also promote leaky gut. Leaky gut means your gut becomes too permeable. It's supposed to absorb the nutrients and things. That's what our intestines do. But a leaky gut is letting too many things in instead of screening out what is not useful to us. And it allows substances to enter our bloodstream that trigger an immune response and inflammation. So if you choose the unprocessed whole foods, it supports that gut integrity where your intestines will be able to screen out the harmful substances instead of letting them into your bloodstream. So I'm going to talk about meal prep because this is anxiety prevention for lazy people, and meal prep is the way that I have found increases the chances of eating well while respecting the fact that it's not easy in the world we live in to make the kinds of choices that are healthiest for us because we're just surrounded by all kinds of easier and not as healthy options. We are a lazy species. We evolved to put forth as little energy as we have to survive. It makes sense if you think about it. Thousands of years ago, food was very scarce. We were in danger of starving. So we're not going to evolve to want to be going out of our way to do a whole bunch of things if we don't have to. We want to save our energy for running away from the saber-toothed tiger and hunting and gathering our food. And otherwise, we're going to want to sit around. That makes sense for then. For now, it really is a pain in the ass because I can be glued to my couch and I know that's not healthy, but I feel like my evolution's working against me and it's so hard to get up and do things. So if I'm hungry, I will absolutely reach for the easiest thing. So if the easiest thing to grab is some goldfish crackers, because I keep them in the house for my granddaughter, I will grab those. But if I've meal prepped and there's a bunch of salad jars in my fridge, I'll grab those. It's just as easy and it makes me feel good to grab it. I actually like that better than some goldfish crackers. If you can make it really easy to grab something healthy, then you can effortlessly change your eating and decrease your inflammation. All it takes is that meal prep piece of it. If you want to, you could spend the better part of a day meal prepping. If I'm really in the mood to cook, it can be fun to try new recipes. If you like to cook, it can be a creative outlet, but it's certainly not mandatory. The way that I meal prep that doesn't take a lot of time is that I will create a double batch of something and then I eat it all week. Now, you have to not be so bothered about eating the same thing every day. I know a lot of people don't like that. It doesn't happen to bother me. It's just one meal, typically my lunch, that I'll make a big pot of soup or curry, and then I'll have that for lunch every day. Similarly, I will make 5 salad jars in quart mason jars, and then I will have a salad for every day that week. The weekends, I don't really count so much, but the Monday through Fridays when I'm working and I'm busier, that's when I'll grab whatever is around. So between the salad jar and the double batch of something, it's not that much cooking. It's like cooking a Sunday dinner, but it's something that lasts all week. This is what works for me. I've seen it work for other people. I would love for you to experiment and find out what works for you. I don't happen to have kids in the house right now. They're all grown and launched. If you have kids around, it can be harder to meal prep for them as well as you. So obviously this isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. but I want to give you some good ideas to go on and to try to find out what kind of preparation can you do so that our lazy human evolution is rewarded by being able to grab something really fast. It can be something prepackaged. When my kids were growing up, I kept pretty healthy Trader Joe's entrees on hand so that I could just take one to the office for lunch. Similarly, I would have cans of soup on hand and just grab one and bring it to work. Those also work for weeknight meals too. If you read the ingredients and make sure you're getting something where you recognize all the ingredients and they don't sound like chemicals, then you're probably eating something that is not very inflammatory. If you want to look into this further, there's plenty of information out there. There's anti-inflammation cookbook. You can find articles and blogs online. I'll put a few links that I like in this lesson. Really, the most important thing to remember about inflammation in food is that if it's something that actually exists in its original form as a food, then it's going to be not inflammatory unless you happen to be sensitive or allergic to it. I'm not prescribing any certain way to eat in terms of eat meat, don't eat meat, avoid carbs, eat carbs. You can figure out what kind of food you like to eat, but eat the food that is the most closely related to its natural form. In other words, a hot dog is so processed, but a pork loin is not so processed. Corn is corn. It grew, especially if it's organic. Corn chips, like those Fritos I mentioned that I like so much, very processed. I could really go off on a tangent about seed oils. If you're not sure what I mean by seed oils, think again, the less processed, the better. If it's an oil that exists in nature without any processing in a factory, then it's a healthy fat. So you can press olives and have olive oil, so that's fine. You can get butter from milk without a factory intervention, so that's fine, unless you're lactose intolerant. Now, oils like canola oil, which is another name for rapeseed oil, safflower oil, corn oil, those don't exist in nature. Think about corn. If you squeeze corn, you don't get oil. If you squeeze safflowers, you don't get oil. To make those products into oil requires a lot of chemicals and a lot of heat in a factory. And what comes out, that oil, is cheap to produce, and that's why it's out there. But they are the opposite of healthy. They're extremely inflammatory. I don't want to lose the plot in this presentation and go too far down the rabbit hole of seed oils, so I'm going to give you some links to read more about it if you want to. But in general, the food industry has tried to convince us that these bottles of canola oil and corn oil are healthy, but they are the opposite of healthy. Enough said. Moving on. So I hope you've gotten some ideas for how to incorporate food that's not inflammatory into your diet without disrupting your life and causing a lot of stress. I really want to respect the fact that we're supposed to be lazy and do the easiest things. So if the easiest thing is to grab that salad jar or whatever out of your fridge, or grab that organic frozen meal out of your freezer, then you'll do that. Okay, I'm going to move on now and talk about movement. Being sedentary is inflammatory. So in other words, the more you sit, the more inflammation results in the body. And again, that's because sitting is not a natural state for us. And yet my job is so sedentary. So many people's jobs are sedentary. And so there's this chronic source of inflammation that's going to raise our anxiety whether we realize it or not, just because physically our body is going into this low-level immune response to the chronic stress of being sedentary. So the solution actually isn't becoming some kind of athlete. The solution is actually just incorporating bits and pieces of movement into your day throughout the day. This isn't the kind of movement that's going to torch calories or all those kind of weight loss industry things. This is just the kind of movement that's going to get your blood flowing on a regular basis. And the effects of that are so significant that it's almost like a magic trick, that if you get up and walk around for 5 minutes every hour, the health benefits and the longevity associated with doing that is remarkable. The research is very clear that the less sedentary we are, the longer we live, the fewer mental and physical health problems we have. There are so many benefits to moving your body more throughout the day that I'm going to go through these slides with you and talk about each one. The first thing that moving your body more does is that it regulates the production of more cytokines that are anti-inflammatory, and it reduces the production of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. It also reduces inflammatory markers CRP and IL-6. Those are the ones that are measurable in lab tests, so you can see if you have a lot of inflammation in your body. The C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 are the two inflammatory markers that exercising reduces. Moving more also helps your immune system be more efficient, and it increases the production of T cells, which means better regulation of inflammation. Moving your body also regulates cortisol production, and cortisol is the stress hormone that is inflammatory. Moving improves insulin sensitivity, which regulates metabolic inflammation. And finally, moving increases the production of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a protein that's associated with decreased inflammation and better cognitive function. So you want an increase in BDNF, and moving your body does that. I'm going to share with you what has worked for me and working with clients dealing with anxiety to just incorporate more movement in a lazy way. It might sound like a contradiction to move in a lazy way, but seriously, it can be done. And I know because I'm a total slack ass. Okay, the first thing I want you to do is to figure out a way to walk more. That sounds really simple. It just requires a little bit of focus and attention and a little bit of planning. If you work in an office, make it a habit to walk around either in the office, go up and down stairs in the stairwell, pace when you're on the phone, find an empty conference room and do laps around the conference table. There are ways to walk around just to move your body for a few minutes every hour. That's going to decrease your inflammation, and it's going to raise your resistance to anxiety as well as a host of other emotional and physical things. I'll share with you what I've done, and it did involve about a $400 investment. I bought a walking pad, which is like a mini treadmill, and then I bought a very inexpensive standing desk. I can get on it in between my therapy clients and walk for 5 minutes. Because the desk is there, I can write my therapy notes on my laptop while I'm walking. I'm not even walking that fast. I'm walking like 2.5, 3 miles an hour, but it really adds up over the course of a day. You don't have to spend money to do this. If you don't have the means or the desire to invest in a walking pad, it's not necessary. It's just something that I was able to do, and I recognize the privilege that I have of being able to invest that way. You can absolutely just walk around. It's that simple. You can set rules for yourself to give yourself some structure and motivation and turn it into a game. Like, you're only going to talk on the phone when you're walking around. Or you'll only listen to one of your favorite podcasts when you're walking. Or make a rule that you set a timer, and when it goes off, you walk for 5 minutes and you can talk on the phone or listen to music. Having that kind of structure can help you turn it into a habit. Okay, so that first suggestion is incorporating snippets of walking into your day. My next one is trying to make a habit of taking a 10-minute walk every day. If you have exercise equipment, you can do it on the exercise equipment, or you can do it outdoors. The best way to make this a habit is to lay out walking clothes and shoes and just put them on in the morning. And then even if you don't get around to doing the walk till later, you're already ready for it. The good news with this tip of taking a walk every day is that many of you are already doing this, whether you realize it or not. If you have to walk to public transportation, That's that 10-minute walk I'm talking about. If you have to get up because your job requires you to walk around between departments, that's the moving that I'm talking about. So you might not need to make any adjustments. You might be doing this low-level movement of just walking on a regular basis throughout the day. You might have that level of activity locked down, and that's great. I know personally I don't, and many people don't, and it's because I work from home. So I can go all day just sitting and working, and it's not healthy. So I've developed these tips to help myself and to help people who are in the same boat, who find that they can easily sit for hours every day. Okay, I'm going to move on and talk about sleep now. During deep sleep, especially during slow wave sleep, the body releases anti-inflammatory molecules. And these molecules help counterbalance the inflammatory molecules that get produced when we're awake. Put another way, sleep is the time when the immune system can recover, and sleep supports the immune system. When we get enough deep sleep, our glymphatic system has a chance to do the work it does. The glymphatic system is amazing. You've probably heard of the lymphatic system, where we have lymph nodes and lymph fluid flushes out and detoxifies our bodies. And the glymphatic system is the cerebrospinal fluid, and it does the same things with our brain. It cleans out our brains, and it's freaking amazing that scientists discovered through brain scans that the brain tissue literally shrinks when we're in deep sleep to open up more room for the glymphatic fluid to flush out the toxins. And toxins mean proteins that are inflammatory. So when you're not getting enough deep sleep, the glymphatic fluid can't clean us out, and those toxins build up, and that's very inflammatory. Another thing that enough deep sleep does is it helps us to regulate our cortisol levels. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and it is inflammatory. In acute stress reactions, we want the cortisol. We want to be able to get stressed if it's a survival situation and we need to save ourselves. But chronic levels of elevated cortisol can lead to chronic health problems, and so getting enough deep sleep helps our bodies know how to regulate those levels. A third thing that getting enough quality sleep does is that it improves your insulin sensitivity, because your metabolism is closely related to inflammation, and when your insulin sensitivity is in the normal range, it helps regulate your metabolic inflammation levels. Getting a good night's sleep sounds like such a cliche, but it really is so important for your health. And if you find yourself chronically sleep deprived, probably the best thing you could do for your emotional health and your physical health is to try to work out how to get a better night's sleep on a regular basis. A word about sleep apnea, because you'll notice that I keep referring to getting enough quality sleep or getting enough deep sleep, and there's a reason for that. You might be sleeping through the night or doing what you think is sleeping through the night, but if you have sleep apnea, you're actually not getting deep sleep or enough deep sleep to do these kinds of recovery activities that our immune system needs while we're sleeping. I'm not a sleep expert, but I want to tell you, if you are a heavy snorer, I encourage you to get that checked out by your doctor or by a sleep specialist, because snoring isn't as normal as we write it off to be, as a sort of annoying habit. There's a chance you might have sleep apnea, and it's easily treatable by wearing a CPAP machine. The quality of your sleep will improve tremendously. This is reflected in the literature. It's reflected in my clients' lives, and I went through it just this past year where I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. I wear a CPAP now, and it's amazing. I didn't even know what poor sleep I was getting until I got the sleep study, and it turned out I was waking up over 50 times an hour, just not realizing it because of my breathing. And once I got the CPAP, I wake up about 7 times an hour, which is within the normal range. And I noticed within a couple of weeks of wearing the CPAP that when I wake up in the mornings, I don't need coffee until I can go hours and hours without coffee. I used to think I was just a huge coffee addict, but my sleep got so much better that I can wake up and I can wait until lunch to have coffee. The reason why I found out I had it is because my husband told me that I had started snoring. It was a new development for me, and I would have never known, and I didn't even know that my sleep was so poor. So I really encourage you to talk to your doctor if you are a snorer, because it might not be just an annoying thing that you do. It might be suggesting some kind of treatable sleep disorder. Otherwise, from a more general perspective, prioritizing good sleep practices will help you maintain lower levels of chronic inflammation, and so it will help you be more resistant to anxiety. And the kind of sleep hygiene things that I won't go into in a lot of detail here, I'll put a link to an article, but things like trying to go to bed around the same time every night and get up around the same time every morning, having a comfortable sleep environment that tends to be cold, and avoiding stimulants close to bedtime like caffeine. Usually exercising close to bedtime gives you energy, makes it hard to sleep. Alcohol actually disrupts sleep cycles. Adopting the kind of habits that just promote good sleep will help to prevent anxiety. Okay, food, movement, and sleep are the three things that you can invest very little time and money in, but get huge returns in terms of having less inflammation in your body, which will make you more resistant to anxiety. Now, anxiety is my focus because that's what I do, but actually if you implement these changes, it's going to help basically every area of your life. If you struggle with a mood disorder, if you're just stressed out in general, it's going to have a global effect. I'm talking about it specifically in terms of anxiety prevention, just again, because that's my world, is I'm always talking about anxiety and trying to help people be less anxious. I hope you got some good tips for implementing some minor changes that will give you major results in terms of preventing anxiety. Thanks again for joining me in this course. I hope you found the content valuable and insightful as you keep pursuing your creative passions. Personal and professional growth is really an ongoing process, so I want to offer you some next steps. If you haven't already, grab my free resource, The Anxious Artist's 1-Minute Mindset Shift. It teaches a simple technique to shift yourself out of anxiety or overwhelm so you can get back into your creative flow. It just takes 1 minute to implement, but it's really effective and easy to master. I also put some bonus journal prompts at the end of this download, so I'll put a link to it down below. You'll also find a link to a free online workshop called the Inner Critic Hackathon. This is a workshop that I've offered live in the past, and right now I've got it on demand where you can sign up and take it over the course of the 5 days like it was originally given, or all at once or at your own pace. There's downloadable worksheets, and I'll walk you through a process for learning how to collaborate with your inner critic so that you don't feel put down by it or you're not just trying to ignore it. I have other mini courses similar to this one available, so I'll put a link to that and you can explore those. Those are all available inside my Creative Ease membership, so if you're finding any of them appealing, you might consider joining Creative Ease for $37 a month instead of buying the courses a la carte. The membership includes all past lessons and courses and a new one every month. Also, it includes twice monthly live office hours with me on Zoom and a private online community for members. We're a tight-knit, really supportive bunch. It's kind of like you've got a mental health expert at your fingertips, bringing you cutting-edge information about emotional well-being and being surrounded by people who are really cheering you on and supporting you in whatever your creative goals are. So I'll give you a link so you can learn more about the Creative Ease membership as well. Thanks again for joining me today. I can't wait to see what amazing things you accomplish. Take care and keep creating.